IB Bio students. All right, today we continue with water balance, and this is still part of 11.3. We're going to look at the consequences of dehydration and overhydration as an application. So we have to remember that it's important for organisms to keep an appropriate water balance, because without that, homeostasis cannot happen accordingly. So a person can dehydrate or a person can overhydrate, which you might be thinking, well, that sounds weird. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So dehydration is when a cell loses too much water, and it loses too much water due to a hypertonic environment. So when a erythrocyte or red blood cell dehydrates, this is what's going to happen, right? It becomes shriveled up like this, and this is this is very extreme here, shriveled up red blood cell. If it gets to this point, then this could lead to serious consequences. But if a person just becomes slightly dehydrated, then that person is going to become thirsty, and that person is going to urinate very little, and the urine is going to be very concentrated and dark, as we talked before. The fact that there's very little water in blood cells and other cells is going to cause blood pressure to drop, and that means that the heart will increase to try to compensate for this. So it's going to also affect the heart, right, as the heart is working faster and more. The individual will become lethargic and experience an inability to lower the body temperature because the individual can't sweat. Remember, this is a form of evaporative cooling. So the person is, this increase in temperature inside the body it may, right, if it gets really severe, it may cause seizures, brain damage, and eventual death. So dehydration has serious consequences. Now, overhydration, which can't really happen if you are a healthy individual with healthy kidneys. I mean, you would literally have to drink an enormous amount of water to be overly hydrated. But usually this happens in people with abnormal kidneys or people that retain too much water and they can't properly dispose of the water via urination. So even though this is less common, it can still occur. And this makes the body fluids hypotonic. So if the body fluids is hypotonic, then that means that your cells are going to swell, right? So hippo, you're going to swell up like a hippo. So if this happens, then your urine is going to become very clear. You're going to try to urinate a lot, right, to remove that water from the body. But if you have some type of malfunctioning of your kidneys and that water cannot be released, then that can lead, which is very rare, but still possible, that can lead to some cells swelling so much that they lyse, and it could lead to tissue damage. A person that is overhydrated can feel headaches and disrupted nerve functions in mild cases. And in severe cases, this may lead to blurred vision, delirium, seizures, coma, and eventually death. So what else do we need to know about water balance? We've been talking about this in other videos, but the essential understanding here pretty much goes over a topic that I've mentioned before, which is that the length of the loop of Henle is positively correlated with the need for water conservation in animals. So then that means if we look at this comparison of nephrons in mesic and desert animals, so this is an animal that lives in normal condition, and if you look at the length of the loop of Henle here, okay, the loop of Henle is relatively short, right? So we call this a cortical nephron because most of the nephron is located within the cortex of the kidney. You see less water retention, and because it means that the organism lives within normal conditions, right? So it can dispose of its water, and water loss happens in the form of mostly urine and then evaporation and then feces. But if the organism lives in arid or desert conditions, you find that they have a very long loop of Henle, and we call this the Juxta medullary nephron because the loop of Henle extends deep within the medulla. So, for example, a desert rat, it's going to try to avoid lots of water loss. So notice that most of the water loss from this desert rat comes from evaporation and not urine, right? Because remember that this hypertonic medulla here is going to allow for water from the collecting duct to go back into the blood. So then the urine is less, the urine is more concentrated, so there's less water loss via urine. This is an interesting graph also showing you the relationship between environmental conditions and medullary thickness. So when we think of the medulla, also think about it in terms of thickness, right? So if the medulla is thicker, is going to allow for more hypertonicity. That means that the hypertonic concentration that needs to be established within the medulla is established by salts being released, remember, from the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. So here you see that the smaller, right, so here you see body weight, the smaller the animal is, then the thicker the medulla is going to be, right? So this is going to help the animal, as it is a very tiny animal, to establish more of a hypertonic medium concentration within the medulla, and so that the animal doesn't become hydrated. Arid, small animals have the thickest medulla, and aquatic, big animals have a very thin medulla because, of course, they don't need to retain any of the water because, one, they're big, and two, they live in aquatic organisms. In aquatic environments, sorry. Okay, so that is it for water balance.